From my own research and from the report that Chris has just been telling us about and to which I'm responding, I want to pick out a few points of connection between English church and English society that I think have particular relevance now. And by now, I mean now as a long post-war period of peace, prosperity and liberal optimism comes to a shuddering end. But it's important to remember how difficult this period of peace and prosperity has been for the Church of England, which has endured steady numerical decline, loss of status, and loss of a clear sense of purpose. There have been a flurry of church reports and proposals,
and more of a jazz vibe to it,
like the last Archbishop, for renewal and reform. These reports calling for renewal have too often pretended to be able to turn things around, and in so doing, they just led to more pressure, particularly on clergy and congregations, followed by more disappointment. Their overblown rhetoric says it all: transforming culture, renewal and reform at the heart of every community, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we are at the end of that era. I hope so. And not just because the church is changing, but because English society has most definitely changed. And what we see now in, let's call it the post-progressive era, is that England and Englishness have much greater salience. That cheery belief in perpetual progress has staggered and fallen, along with secular progressivism and indeed secularism in general. That there's a greater openness and interest in religion and spirituality, greater public profile and greater political prominence on the right in particular. And all this is happening in a context of polarization that's obviously full-blown in the USA. And it's got the potential to poison life here also, unless the USA serves as a warning rather than an encouragement. So it's in this particular post-progressive context that I want to think about the Church of England's possibilities of connection. And actually, I think it has more of those possibilities than it has had for some time in this era. I want to start with parishes. When Andrew Brown, who it's lovely to see here, and I concluded our book called That Was the Church That Was, about the decline of the old imperialistic church, we wrote at the end, the vision of a lovely church in a lovely village means to clergy planners a building that is impossible to heat, endlessly expensive to maintain, and a congregation who thinks that the church belongs to them. All these things are true, but just possibly the congregation has a point. I still think that the parishes are what matter most, but I have never believed in a uniform programme to renew them all. They are just too diverse. I think church growth literature is a con. The idea that a Holy Trinity Brompton-inspired programme could be rolled out everywhere was also a folly. I sometimes reach back to Nancy Ammerman's book, Congregation and Community, which, although it was a study of congregations in the USA, was a good one. And it found that the ones that do well are the ones that have fruitful relations with their unique communities, or in the UK, parishes. I can kind of hear Andrew in my head when I say that, saying, no shit, Sherlock. Of course. But it's amazing how that is forgotten, that you have to find a unique relationship with your place. And those relations are fostered by patient attention, intelligent and mutually beneficial partnerships, and the slow winning of trust. I've seen widely diverse examples. Far-flung parishes in Northumberland beautifully served by lay ministers. Lively evangelical churches in university cities aimed at students. Higher than high ritualistic churches in wealthy cities. A parish in the Welsh Marches currently being rejuvenated by young clergymen with 6 other churches, who's working with lay women in their 80s in one case, and he actually listens to their insights about how to engage with local needs. And the report we're discussing gives other examples, including very notably an urban parish doing community organising and responding to serious need. Church of England clergy have recently been given a good pay rise and a good pension rise. Great. It's surely better to have fewer properly rewarded and trained clergy and more lay volunteers than to follow the unaffordable dream of a clergyman in every parish. I heard a startling ratio recently from one of my PhDs. The Girl Guide Association has 361 paid employees, overseeing 80,000 volunteers, principally unit leaders, and approximately 300,000 members. So 361 paid employees in the guides, overseeing 80,000 volunteers. There's something to be learned here. And just for comparison, the Church of England currently has about 690,000 church Sunday attenders. So a bit more than double the guides. So much for parishes. I'm sticking with P's, a bit like a sermon device. My next P is for prayer. One of the interesting things about prayer is that everyone knows what it is, and they always have, everywhere. Secular people are not immune. People can pray even if they are not sure about God or whether prayer even works. Prayer cards left in a hospital chapel in a study say things like, "Thank you for the doctors and nurses. Please make my dad better again." You don't need an addressee. William James gives a good definition of prayer in The Varieties of Religious Experience. He says, prayer, or inner communion with the spirit thereof, be that spirit God or law, is a process wherein work is really done and spiritual energy flows in and produces effects, psychological or material, within the phenomenal world. So prayer is open to all, in a way that an open societal church like the Church of England needs to be too. Worship is much more exclusive. It was called the Book of Common Prayer for a reason. Worship is not common. A lot of people don't know what it is, and certainly wouldn't seek it out if they did. The 20th century church gave it too much focus, still does, I think. Prayer is a much better connection point. It doesn't need to be fixed into a single liturgical or weekly slot. You don't need to give people formulas for how to do it. It's enough to offer settings with quiet, with beauty, with history, with permission. Sometimes in solitude, sometimes in solidarity. No phones, no distractions. And where else do you get that? My next P is for place. Now, the Church of England likes to think it's unique, but it isn't. It's part of a group of 7 Northern European Reformation churches: Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Scotland, Sweden. They were all formed, as I'm sure you all know, in the 16th century Reformation as integral to the process of nation building in their respective territories. They are by nature territorial, national churches. They're not universal churches like the Roman Catholic, nor congregational ones like American churches. They are churches of place, in this case, England. The Church of England helped to make England and Englishness, both locally and nationally. Incidentally, I've always thought that being C of E is rather like being Jewish, and I was grateful for Lawrence Goldman's chapter in the book, which confirms this thought, because they are both ethnic religions. And who can speak for England? As was pointed out in the report, Gareth Southgate can, and he did a great job. But the Prime Minister and the monarch can't, because they have to speak for the UK. Only the primate of all England can and should as part of their job description. And I want to hear what they have to say. And I'm quite sure many others do too. And I want to hear a different account of Englishness from that of the English Defence League's successors. It is a shame, I think, that recent church leaders have seemed fretful about talking about this, maybe for fear of sounding nationalistic. I see it as the opposite. Those two great theologians of national churches, F.D. Morris, who my chair is King's is named after because he was at King's before they sacked him, another story, and N.F.S. Grundtvig in Denmark, both those national church theologians are very clear that being a particular church for a particular place is a sign of modesty. You're not the global solution to everything. And you can be, as they both showed, rooted without being nationalistic, English without, or Danish, without being against other races, and Christian without being against other faiths. The past is my fourth P, my fourth connection point between church and England. The Church of England is a longue durée church. It connects us with ancestors, past events, English history. This is another open goal for connection today. The podcast, The Rest is History, is currently, I just looked up, the second most popular podcast after the Joe Rogan Experience, and with good reason. It's history, the past. It's a way to situate oneself, to compare, to refer back, to get a sense of proportion and belonging. In a world now horribly focused on the next new thing, it is an essential corrective. There's huge opportunity here for the Church of England. And then my final P is not a P at all, it's a B for beauty. Beauty is something the Church of England has in spades. And without beauty, life is unbearable. Nearly all of us try to beautify our own little domestic nests according to our own tastes. When our ancestors tried to express what was sacred, they did it through beauty. The Church of England has beautiful churches, cathedrals, graveyards, and art. It has beauty of word, literature, theology, and music, of ceremony and movement, and of flowers. Many of these things are still loved and cherished by many, and not just churchgoers. This is a big part of why cathedrals are doing well. Church visiting is popular. Choirs thrive. Flower arranging is also popular still, always has been. Pilgrimages and bell ringing also. Far from being elitist, such beauty is open, accessible to anyone, irrespective of wealth or faith. This is a wonderful point of contact with England. So I am embracing the message of many of the contributors to the William Temple Foundation report, the message that there are solid points of connection between the Church of England and the English people that are coming into clearer view again. I'm picking up hints from the report and my own polling amongst Anglicans. I've mentioned in particular parish, prayer, place, past, and beauty. But I want to end on a note of realism about something I did not find in the report, which is the great point of disconnection between church and people. And that's the values gap that has opened up between them. I don't think it is true that we are still a Christian nation, and that's especially in relation to personal values. I think those values have now shifted decisively away from a church endorsed ethic of duty, obligation, and self-sacrifice. A vivid symbol of this becoming ethical divorce, at least, is Archbishop Geoffrey Fisher in 1955, I think, saying of Princess Margaret's decision to cancel her marriage to Group Captain Peter Townsend, after he, the Archbishop himself, had brought pressure to bear on them. What a wonderful person the Holy Spirit is. Apparently, Margaret could never forgive him. And England has thoroughly rejected that version of Christian ethics. Not all of the other 7 societal churches of Northern Europe have fallen into this values gap, and some are doing much better than the Church of England. I think it remains a stumbling block, and it will continue to do so unless the church has the humility to accept that here, society, a bit like the tax collectors and prostitutes, may actually have something to teach it. The connection points have to allow traffic to run both ways. And I'm going to stop at that point because I'm looking forward to a good time of Q&A. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Linda, very much for setting out some really thought-provoking ideas, which I know will be picked up through our interaction with the audience. But before we get to that point, it's my very great pleasure to lead us in that response to Linda's talk, and welcome Professor John Denham. John was, as I'm sure many of you know, a minister in the Labour government of Tony Blair, former chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, 2003-2007, and Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in Gordon Brown's cabinet. As part of what he does in Southampton, he is the founder of the Centre for English Identity and Politics, where he continues to research, write, speak, and broadcast regularly on identity and England-related issues. So really, John, you are so well placed to respond to many of the issues that Linda has raised in her talk, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Linda for a very, very stimulating opening statement, which raises lots of questions that I'd like to debate directly straight away. But let me say a little bit in response to Linda, but also in response to the book published by the William Temple Foundation, which is far richer than I can possibly do justice to this evening. You've heard about my political career, my current academic position. I should be quite clear, I'm probably the only person on this call, I don't know, but I'm not a person of faith. On the other hand, in my entire political experience, I always recognized that there were many of my constituents who, perhaps 20% it would be across the country as a whole, who very consciously try to live their lives according to the teachings of their faith. And there are many others, of course, who are influenced by values deeply imbued by faith. And I always took the view that if you didn't understand those motivations, then you didn't understand the nation that you wanted to serve or to lead, whatever language you prefer. I think I'm here today, though, because I have been interested for a long time in the relationship between our national identities and the political choices we make. Why were people who emphasize their Englishness more likely to vote Leave, for example? And you can trace that through to why it was that the clergy generally voted Remain while the flocks generally voted Leave. But these days, though, I must admit, despite the name of my unit at the University of Southampton, I tend to talk less about national identity as a thing and more about the extent to which national identity is something that signifies what we think about the nation of which we are part. So my contribution this evening, I suppose, is to say, what do we mean when we talk about England as a nation? And what does that mean for the Church of England? The contributions to the William Temple book are very, very stimulating. As an observation, though, I would say that some, not all, but some were more perhaps about a church in England and in language that might describe any denomination that had been losing members. It was more about a church in England than a church or the Church of England. Now, tonight I want to talk about England as England, and therefore implicitly I want to talk about what that might mean for the Church of England. Now, I know that some people are uncomfortable even talking about nation, perhaps because it's associated with a particular telling of the national history. Perhaps it's a reluctance to draw any distinction between ourselves and those of other nations if we see ourselves as part of a wider community. The reality, though, is that that's not how most people think about the nation. And actually, nation is at the centre of the national imagination. To give you one example, in a few weeks' time, Rachel Reeves will present her budget. She will raise and spend taxes. None of us expect individually to get back precisely what we put in. And it could be that the young radical graduate Black Lives Matter activist in London may help pay the pension of the reform voting white homeowner in Hartlepool, or vice versa. That's how the system works. Whatever we might think individually of decisions that Rachel Reeves takes, we accept the fundamental premise that we belong to a national community, a community of shared interests, one in which we owe obligations to each other and expect reciprocity from each other. Even those who wish to leave the United Kingdom generally accept there must be a legitimate process of consent. And implicitly, we know that the obligations we owe to each other within the nation are different to those with whom we want to show solidarity and support in other parts of the world. So I think we need to have in this discussion tonight a process of pulling the nation out of the back of our minds and into the foreground. Because in principle, nations are simple. They have boundaries, they have a people. They have some story of who we are and how we came to be here, a shared history. They have an idea of shared values, shared cultures, shared language. They have, or at least aspire to have, a government, a body of law. They have an idea of how they want to be governed, where sovereignty should lie, should power be devolved, what's the role of the courts. And these are not policy issues. They go to the heart of who we think we are as a nation. Now, all of those can be, and of course are, contested. Separatists or nationalists or aggressors may challenge the borders. Defining who the people are, particularly at times of high migration, can be controversial. Just ask the National Trust about the challenges of telling the history in a way that we all accept. What values, culture, or language we share can all be argued about, and these can be difficult discussions. But I'd suggest three things should be clear. Any institution that wishes to be a national institution must be willing to give answers to those questions of what sort of nation we are, or at the very least, to be proactive in shaping the debate about them. Secondly, I would suggest that faiths, all faiths, should want to be part of that discussion. As Linda has said, prayer, place, past, culture run through the Church of England as they do other faiths in sometimes different ways. I suggested at the beginning that faith is in the business of inculcating values. Faith is not the whole idea of the nation, but it's part of it. At Southampton, we have, in a project led by Jonathan Chaplin and Andrew Bradstock, I know Andrew's on this call, a website dedicated to writing about faith and England's national identities. And there are already some rich contributions that touch on all these issues. What does it mean to belong when you also have an identity with a wider global faith? How has history shaped our understanding of faith? And what is the relationship between diversity, multiculturalism, and belonging? So I think faith should be part of this discussion about the nation. And the third observation is that faith and faith organisations cannot stand outside that debate. Even if faiths were to say we have nothing to say about the nation, would be a statement of enormous significance. It would be to say, well, we are ambivalent on the question of who belongs here, of what values we share, or how we tell our history. We will in effect allow others to decide those questions. Well, if I might say so, history has not treated faiths well when others are allowed to decide who belongs and who does not. So I would say that the Church of England needs to engage in the debate about nation, even if it only wanted to be a church in England. But if it wants to be the Church of England, it is essential. And that means being willing to talk about England as a nation, a place with a geography and a people, being able to talk about who the people are, to embrace the diversity that is England, to talk about how we tell our stories so that everyone's story is part of the national story, to explore what we share in common and how we handle difference where it is inevitable. To lead, as many contributors suggested, in ensuring that everyone has a voice and a stake in the way the nation is run. Now, I know some people struggle with England in particular as an idea. It's a sort of consequence of history. For a very long time, England and Britain could, if you were English, be elided as the heart of a great empire. That empire's gone. Britishness is no longer an overarching shared identity that sits above all others. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have become more distinct. It's not just the Church of England that has changed in the post-war period. If you think back to when the late Queen was crowned, everybody accepted that the monarch was the unchallenged head of state, that the Church of England was the unchallenged official state church, that Parliament was supreme, that it sat alongside
Looks like John is frozen there. Let's just hope he can come back on the call.
Sorry, can you still hear me? I seem to drop out there. So England's the only part of the UK not to have had a debate about how it's governed. It has no institutions of national governance. It paradoxically finds itself as the largest nation, but one which is systematically marginalized in political debate. So my answer to the question implicit in who converts who is that the Church of England has to engage with England as it exists, as Linda has said, but it also could have a role to play in shaping the England that will exist. That's a challenge for all faiths. It's one I talked about as long ago as 2013 in Ripon Cathedral. But since then, nation and England have become much more important. We see it in the rise of national populism. We see it in the contest to own the flags. And most relevant to this discussion, we see it in the Christian nationalism that shows no fear about talking about the nation. Aaron Banks, Reform UK candidate for the West of England mayor, said recently, England is an Anglo-Saxon Christian country. Danny Kruger, who was a Conservative MP, when he said, who called for a recovery of a Christian politics and a refounding of the nation on the teachings that Alfred made the basis of the common law of England all those centuries ago. And he had an equal dislike for Islam and for woke. Tommy Robinson's march, addressed by Elon Musk, was adorned with prayers and Christian crosses. And Katie Lamb, a prominent frontbench Conservative MP, a member of Christians in Parliament, has called for the expulsion of potentially millions of people who are legally here on the grounds of cultural incompatibility, something Enoch Powell never did. These are not an outbreak of an eccentric mixture of bad theology, bad history, and downright badness. Christian nationalism is a political movement, well-funded, well-organized, well-networked. It has a vision. And I wonder, is it one that will appear to, that some will want to welcome precisely because it seems to be a confident, patriotic Christianity? Does the Church of England have the confidence to reject it and give its own equally confident response? And what will be the cost if it does not? So, though it's not up to me to answer the question, I think, what I might hope to hear is a positive welcome to the diversity of faith and race that is England today, a church dedicated to defending the contribution that faith can make, and which offers the leadership and creates the space for the difficult discussions that are essential in a cohesive nation. A church that gives voice to those who don't feel they have one. Yes, a voice to those disconcerted by rapid social and economic change, as well as those facing prejudice and discrimination. A church perhaps that can help find the common ground across faiths and the broader values of democratic politics. It has always struck me, for example, that the idea of the common good is one that has numerous roots in Christian teaching, in other faiths, and in secular philosophical and political traditions. It's not, Chris, for me to say what the Church of England should do, but a church like that would, I have no doubt, be good for England.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. That was a great way to finish your contribution, which again has raised a whole series of issues around the changing nature of Englishness and who's got the confidence to offer interpretations of Englishness and whose voice will prevail in the months and years that lie ahead.